All right, ladies and gentlemen, I played with this title today just a little bit. It's Jews are on a journey, Gentiles on a quest. And we're going to hit Romans 9:30 through 33, and then Romans 10, 1 through 10 today. And we're going to go back a little bit to Romans 9 and finish up the 30 through 33. And I think it's important before we really talk about that is to just remind ourselves that what we're talking about here are the Jews and their unbelief in this new process, right? That there is now a Christ who has come, and that Christ is the law, is the word, is what it is they have been worshiping before his arrival. He is the culmination of the word. And so they're having some trouble. If you don't know this about Jews, what separates Jews from us Christians is that the Jews don't necessarily, well, they don't, unless they're Masonic Jews, they don't accept Jesus as the Messiah. All right, that's the general theme of Judaism, is that they don't see Jesus as a Messiah, but as a prophet, although there are a couple of sects that do. And so when we start talking about Jews and Gentiles in this particular case, we have to remember that the Jews and that we're on the scene of the introduction of Christ to the Jews and the Gentiles, right? So prior to this, the Gentiles were not a part of the elect. They were not a part of God's chosen people. They were not to be saved according to the law, right? And so we're in this place where Jesus shows up, the Jews show up, and the Gentiles are introduced into this family, right? And the Jews are really struggling with this concept that Jesus is the Christ. And they're fighting back, right? And I say fighting back because they're using the word distorted to suggest that he's not the Christ, to say that he's just another man. In fact, if we want to take it straight to the cross, the Jews persecuted and were the ones who actually conducted the execution of our Christ. Even though it was done by the Romans, it was the Jewish church system that actually put him up on the cross. They were the only ones that had the power to do that. And so that's kind of where we are, right? So we're going to jump into this. And I said I was going to be able to do this. And guess what, Christy? It didn't. I'm going to do it this way then. All right. So I'm going to start with Romans 30 through 33. And it says, what shall we say then? Now let me get this out of the way for a moment. That's not helping me. All right, there we go. It says, what shall we say then? That Gentiles who do not pursue righteousness have attained it? That is a righteousness that is by faith. But that Israel who pursued a law that would lead to righteousness did not succeed in reaching the law. Why? Because they did not pursue it by faith, but as if it were based on works. They have stumbled over the stumbling stone, as it is written, behold, I am laying in Zion a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. So here the author picks up this piece with talking about the Jews and the Gentiles, and he's asking some very difficult questions. How is it that we can accept these Gentiles who have never been in the law as being right with God? And he says that in 30, he says that Gentiles who did not pursue righteousness have attained it. How is it possible that you didn't look for something, but somehow in the process you got it? That doesn't make sense to us. And in fact, you got it by some sort of faith. But that Israel, the Jews, who pursued a law that would lead to righteousness. See, prior to this, prior to Christ coming on the scene, the law was what they used to say you were in right standing with God. So following the law automatically made you righteous. Kind of interesting. And that's what they believe. And he's saying, are we saying that those people who actually went after the law didn't succeed in reaching it and succeed in reaching righteousness? Why? And then he answers the question of why, and he says, because they didn't do it by faith. This whole faith thing, and we're going to, I talked to Pastor a little bit. We're probably going to do some stuff on faith here pretty soon. Christy and I did some stuff in the month of, I think it was October. But there's a lot more to do with faith, because faith is really what drives our ability to be in Christ. We have to have faith, and we have to have Christian faith. We have to abide by that faith in order to be fully within, fully protected, fully covered. Right? We have to have that kind of faith. And one of the things that becomes an issue, we'll see this throughout the Bible, there's this discussion of faith and works. And in this particular case, it says because they did not pursue it by faith, but as if it were based on works. And this is to say that they thought that works would get you into heaven, not your faith. And the work was following the law, right? The faith is that Christ is. And that's the capital I-S. Christ is the I am. And so you got these two competing pieces that we've got to work through here, which is what we're going to do in the next portion. And then he says, they have stumbled over the stumbling stone as it is written. And I'm not going to go into it, but I'm going to give you the scripture for that as soon as I get my magnifying glass out here. Because in that particular verse, they are talking about, if you go to Isaiah 8, 1-4, and Isaiah 28, 16, and also in 1 Peter 2, 4-8, again in Mark 12 and 10, you will start to understand that God said he put a stumbling stone out and it was Jesus. that we would, and I love the way they put it here. It said,
I'm sorry, Pastor, could you say the second one for me again, please?
Yes, ma'am, I can repeat all those. Here they are. It says, okay, let me get here. Isaiah 8 and 14, Isaiah 28 and 16, 1 Peter 2, 4-8, and lastly, Mark 12 and 10. And what he's saying is this, that Christ, the one whom God puts in everyone's path, people either build on him in faith or stumble over him in their ruin. Think about that, right? They either build on him the rock or they stumble on him as the stumbling stone. And so the Gentiles, in this particular case, as we go on, start to build on Christ, where the Jews continue to stumble over him even until this day. To this very day, they struggle with this concept. If they ever decided that Jesus was the Messiah, they would no longer be Jews. They would no longer be Jews. Now, guys, I can't see in the chat, but I see there are notes. Oh, okay, you're putting them in there. Gotcha. All right. Gotcha. Let me get that out of the way. So that's what he's getting at here. The author is saying to us, hey, here's the truth about Jesus. For some, he's a stumbling block. For others, he's a building block. And that in the very end, and whoever believes in him, whoever decides to build on him, they will not be put to shame. He's dealing in these last pieces. He's saying, hey, Jews, I need you to see me for who I am. I am the Christ. And this is your opportunity to avoid stumbling. But again, we know that many Jews, well, all the Jews, anybody who professes to be a Jew has already made a determination that he's going to be their stumbling block. And so that kind of ends that piece that we were doing last week, because that was the culmination of that. It was saying, hey, look, I need you to deal with your unbelief. But the author goes on, and we're going to go to 10, Romans 10, and it should say 1 and 2. I missed it by mistake, but it's Romans 10, 1 and 2. Can somebody read that for me? Romans 10, 1 and 2.
I'll read it. Oh, go ahead, Yolanda.
Romans 10, 1 and 2. Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved. For I bear them record that they have a zeal of God, but not according to knowledge. Excuse my voice.
So let's ask a question here. Who is they? Brothers, my heart desire and prayer to God for them is that they may be saved. Who is they?
His fellow Israelites.
Yeah.
All right, Israelites. Are Gentiles Israelites?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say Gentiles.
Makes sense.
This is an interesting.
But I would assume if they're not Jews, Israelites, because everybody that ain't a Jew is a Gentile, right?
Correct.
But you can live in an area and still be Jew or Gentile. So Israel that's like saying, are you American or are you Black? Or are you American or are you Muslim? Right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm glad
Black.
you said
I'm
that.
Black.
I'm glad you said that. I want to dig into that just a little bit, right? Is it possible, though, when you say American versus Black, it appears that being Black is a subset of being an American. Would that be fair to say?
Sure. It is a race within. Yes. It is a race.
So as Christians, are we American Christians?
We're just Christians. Christians is universal.
But is it?
So it's Black.
Somebody's coming.
This is true.
I'm asking because part of the dilemma that we've got to deal with is, are we Christians first or Americans first? I know I'm going to a really difficult space. It sounds political. It is not. It is Christian. What are we first? What is a subset of what? And in this particular case, he's saying that they may be saved. He's talking about Israelites, and specifically, which did not mean Jew or Gentile. It meant anybody who was a resident of Israel.
Okay.
And so he's getting at this thing and saying that, but we've still got to deal with that question, right? Because how many of us operate as Americans first and Christians second? How many of us operate as CFO, CEO, manager, employee, and Christian second? What governs our walk? What supersedes what, and under what conditions does the Christian part of us supersede everything else? I'm not here to give you the answer, ladies and gentlemen. I am not. I am asking you the difficult question. Do you get to put your Christianity down and allow it to be second to anything? Rhetorical question, okay? But one for us to answer. In verse 2, Romans 10:2, he says, "For I bear them witness that they have zeal for God, but not according to knowledge." Can somebody tell me, what is zeal?
Like happiness.
Excitement.
Happiness.
Happiness. Let's see. Keep going.
Excitement.
Yes, yeah.
Excitement.
It's a strong, intense, like, how do you say, desire, almost desire for something. Like if you have a zeal for God, that means you have an excitement, you have a strong urge for everything of that thing. Like I have a zeal for God. So God is like my focus. That's what I'm strongly desire. That's a strong desire for me to, do anything that would get me to that place. It's like I know I'm not really explaining, but zeal is just something, it's a strong push or a strong something inside of you that makes you push towards something. I'll say it like that.
I was gonna say like Paul, he had a zeal, and then but in us, we have that zeal because we thirst for Christ. We just thirst for righteousness.
So
I think I was kind of right. I just looked it up. It says great energy or enthusiasm in pursuit of a cause or an objective. I was on there. I just couldn't say it right.
That is the definition, and I'm gonna throw it up here in a minute, but I'm gonna ask you a little bit of a different question. So what's a zealot?
Oh, what?
A zealot.
Now that
I'm
one,
gonna help on this one.
that's almost like a zealot. Usually when I hear the word zealot, I think of like almost like a fanatic, like somebody that's overboard, a fanatic type person, which is.
Yeah, I'm glad. Okay, and the reason I'm bringing all this up is I really want us to start challenging some of the concepts that we've always been told. I'm not telling you those concepts are wrong. I'm just wanting us to make sure that as we look at these and we line up with stuff, that we understand what we're lining up with, right? And slow our roll so that we can make sure that when I raise my hand, it's a yay, it's a real yay and amen, right? In order for us to do that, we got to make sure that we take the time to really understand what's going on. So zeal is this great energy or enthusiasm in the pursuit of a cause or an objective. It is exactly that. And a zealot comes from this concept of a member of an ancient Jewish sect that aimed at world Jewish theocracy and resisted the Romans until about 700 BC, AD, after that. And what that is talking about, this Jewish theocracy is this the Jews who did not want Christ to be known as the Messiah got fanatical about it and started the prosecution and persecution of anybody who would call him a Christ. And whether they were Gentile or Jew or anybody else, if they picked him up and said that he was the Messiah, they would take action against those folks, be it verbal and in many cases physical. And so they became known as zealots, okay? The word comes from zeal, as you can see, and both words mean just that, the relentless pursuit. And the reason I bring these up is because we are starting in our world, we're starting to see zealots. Because what a zealot will do is whatever they have to do to prove that another thing is wrong and that they are right. There is no moving a zealot. They are zealots. They have decided that everything that is either they're on their side or they're not. And if it's not on their side, then it's not real. Then it's made up. It's a zealot. And so in this particular piece, he clarifies that he knows that these Jews that he's talking about are good people. But then he clarifies at the end and says, and they want to do for God, but they have no real knowledge of him. Boy, does this get painful for me right here, because he finished this whole 2 off by saying, here they are following the law of God, but they don't know it, right? Which leads us to the next question. Why do we need to know the difference between zeal, zealots? Why do we need to understand that as Christians? Any thoughts?
Not to be the only one talking, but I think it's because we can we find that we find those within Christianity. I mean, you can look at some preachers or some ministries, and you can find, there's a fine line. You can find someone that has a lot of zeal and a lot of excitement, and you want to listen to them. And the reason we need to know the difference is because we are apt to follow a person with a lot of zeal because they have this excitement. They bring us in and we want to do that. But for a zealot, if they are just not open to the leading of Christ, so to speak, like, they have what they believe and that's it. Nobody can change them, and nobody can. So even if they're wrong, they're firm in their belief, and they're teaching that, and they're dragging people in with that. I mean, so we have to be able to recognize the difference so that we don't kind of get caught up in something that may not be of God.
Especially within the charismatic movement.
Yeah, I think.
Go Paul.
I think two people can be. It's almost like you can be those individuals who you can go to a church service and you dance and shout, but when you leave, you have no concept of what was taught, what was preached, what God said. But then you say, "Oh, we really had church today," and say, "I'm a Christian, I'm a believer." You may be all those things, but sometimes just having that excitement only without having some context to the word and context to who God is and a relationship with God, you can kind of find yourself just kind of playing the part and not necessarily having the substance.
And Porter, I don't know that I could say it any better, but I would piggyback on this one piece at the very end that you said, which is this of substance, right? This is what you're doing of substance. Can you validate it, or can you go read it? Can you, when you're in your prayer time with God, and does He confirm it? Right? Is this what God wants you to? Is it where He wants you to be? Is it where He wants you to, what He wants you to do? Because there's an importance that we own our Christian walk. It is not, our Christian walk is not directed by pastors, charismatic leaders. Your walk is dictated by your relationship with Christ. Those people who are influences in your life expose you to knowledge that you're able to take in and make a part of your life, along with what happens with Christ, and he validates he validates what you've learned, and then you go out and walk what it is that God has told you to walk. Ultimately, God is in charge of your walk, you and he, in the relationship. And the closer you can get to this concept of walking in the Garden of Eden with God, like Adam and Eve did prior to the fall, the more likely you are to be in the place that God actually wants you to be. But we have to be very careful and protect ourselves from those forces outside that are not necessarily aligned. And we've got to study to show ourselves approved so that we can make sure that we don't fall into those traps. We don't become Jim Jones's followers and go drink the juice. Our job is to each have an individual relationship with Christ, which is where the Jews have a fundamental problem, because they don't accept him as Christ. And that's why he's pleading with them. He says, I know they want to do good. They're desperate to do it, but they're trying to do it by the law, and they need to be with Christ. I'm gonna move. I'm gonna really move. Romans 10:3-4. He says, for being ignorant of the righteousness of God and seeking to establish their own, they did not submit to God's righteousness. For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. How do you become ignorant of the righteousness of God? And how do you seek to establish your own? Well, it's in the law. This is a reference to the law. That prior to Christ, there was the law. And the law was what we had. And in that interpretation process, we created some religious rituals. And in lieu of having a real relationship with God, we created these rules. And we didn't hear God. And so we didn't submit to his righteousness. And he says, but wait, for Christ is the end of the law. He's the culmination of the law, right? He is where the law and the goal of the law meet. And he's saying, Jews, you've got to take Christ. Gentiles, all you know is Christ. You've never submitted to the Jewish rule. And now Christ is here, and you're having faith in Christ without the law. And the Jews have faith in the law and not in Christ. And he says, that's troublesome, because everybody who believes that Christ is the end of the law and is righteousness, anybody who believes that, then you are of Christ. 3 and 4 is where it kind of hits the road. And then in 5, the writer goes back, he says, for Moses writes about the righteousness that is based on the law, that the person who does the commandments shall live by them, right? So here's the law, here are the 10 commandments. So I'm going to ask a weird question here, ladies and gentlemen. Is it possible to follow the 10 commandments and live your life following the 10 commandments, but not be righteous?
Yes, it is possible.
Say more.
It's possible because in order to be righteousness stems from faith, and faith stems from your belief in Jesus Christ. And so if you only believe in God, you only believe and follow the 10 commandments, which are still important. Jesus never said the 10 commandments weren't still important. But if you do those things, but you don't believe that Jesus Christ exists, then you cannot be considered righteous. As Righteousness is driven by faith and belief in Jesus.
Mm. So wait a minute. I can speak for me, right? I won't speak for everybody, but I'll speak for me. I've got these friends who talk about God, right? But they don't talk about Jesus. Are you telling me that they're not righteous?
Not based on the word.
Oh, but I feel like that's really tough.
But the word also says you can't get to the Father except by him.
The Son.
So
Mhm.
talking about him, and you can't really have a relationship with God if you don't have a relationship with Jesus.
But Deborah, you don't understand, Deborah. Look, these are good people.
That's true. But good people on their way to, that's what our pastor used to say. If you living good and you live a right life, but you don't accept Christ, then you still, I mean, that's the secret ingredient, which is not a secret. But
Are you trying to tell me that this God you love, that loves all these people, are going to condemn everybody who doesn't do Christ, but follows the 10 Commandments and believes in God? Are you telling me that?
I am.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where we get the fight, right? That is where people lose their minds, because that on the one hand, they want the riches, rewards of God, but they don't want the requirements of God. And our job as Christians is not to condemn them, but to love them, even in their dysfunction. And our job is not to tell them they're dysfunctional. Our job is not to belittle them or make them feel bad. Our job is to live our lives in a way that they wonder how we live it, and why is it that we have and we are, and they can see special things about us, and they go, well, why is God doing that? And I don't see that. Or in some cases, those individuals look like they're doing better because of the way we view the world. We think it's a financial thing. We look at somebody who's rich and go, well, how did they get all that? But they're poor in a whole lot of things that you don't know anything about. And the thing that they're most poor, potentially most poor in, is that they have no relationship with Christ. Oops. So there's all these pieces. So I'm throwing this out here because he goes back to Moses and says, but the law of Moses. Then he turns around, and I'm going to flip this a little bit. What did Moses not have? What had not happened yet with Moses?
There was no Jesus yet.
Come on. There was no Jesus, right? There wasn't a Jesus to talk about. There was no example of the law. And so I have to keep asking this question, because we talked about this last week. And it's important for us to really get a good working definition. So what is righteousness then? Somebody asked this question last week. What is righteousness?
It's being right with God.
Being right with God. Here's a decent working definition that needs some work, but it's pretty decent. Righteousness is the state of moral perfection required by God to enter heaven. That perfection piece got me, boy. I was like, oh, wait a minute. However, the Bible clearly states that human beings cannot achieve righteousness through their own efforts. Therefore, no one will be, I love this. Therefore, no one, one more time. Therefore, no one will be declared righteous in God's sight by the works of the law. Rather, through the law, we become conscious of our sin. And by God's grace and mercy, we're able to live in right standing with God And I took out something, but I didn't take it out. They didn't put it, but I'd like to put at the end, able to live in right standing with God, even as we are unperfect, right? Because we're not perfect. We're not perfect. And in our imperfection, he grants us grace and mercy.
And James, that's when you said that, that made me think of that's specifically why we need Jesus, because God can see our imperfections through him, and through Christ we are made perfect. So, they say God can't look on sin, so he looks on his son, looks at us through his son, and then he don't see the sin. So that's why you need Jesus.
So I'm bad, okay? I'm bad. I watched the internet thing sometime, whatever they call them, but I was watching one several months back, and I should be, Lord, pray for y'all, pray for me. But I was looking at it, and it was this bride and groom, and they were getting ready to get married, and they were up at the altar, and the pastor, the preacher had said, had them say, do all the things they were supposed to do, and they got to the part where they were pulling the veil up, and when they pulled the veil up, everybody in church was, ooh, it was rough. It was a bad moment, right? And all I could think about it, when I thought about this, I thought about that God sees us through this veil of Christ. And therefore he doesn't see our imperfections. He sees Christ and us through Christ. And so it fills in all the voids and gaps. It makes our makeup perfect. It makes our hair perfect. It makes our outfit look right. He sees us completed through Jesus, right? And so that's why it's so important for Jesus to be here, because he changes the vision of who we are, right? So if we don't accept him, then we go naked before God. And it clearly says that none of us in our nakedness can be perfect. So now you're in trouble. Your saving grace is Jesus, okay? In 6, but the righteous based on faith says, do not say in your heart, who will ascend into heaven, that is to bring Christ down, or who will descend into the abyss, that is to bring Christ up from the dead. Ooh. Stop telling people they're going to Hades. Ain't your business. You don't know. Stop getting into that whole you're not righteous. Get out of that conversation. It's not ours to be had. These are the pieces that really make us uncomfortable, because we're not supposed to do either. We're not telling anybody who's going to heaven, and we're not here to tell anybody who's going to Hades, who will descend, but rather it is our responsibility to love on each individual. I'm running. Oops. And 8 and 9, let me move that so I can read it. It says, but what does it say? The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. Can I change that a moment? Jesus is near you. Jesus is in your mouth. Jesus is in your heart. That is the word of faith that we proclaim. That's how we do it. Because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. The most simple process in the world. Confess, right? Believe, confess, believe, confess. Because if you confess with your mouth that he is the Lord, and believe in your heart that he was raised, that God raised him, you now have access to salvation. Jew and Gentile. Easy for the Gentile who's living by faith already because they had never been a part of the law. Jews, a little bit of a struggle because you didn't say anything about the 10 Commandments. You didn't give me the 608 laws of being a Jew. You gave me this. And then we get to 10. For with the heart one believes and is justified, and with the mouth one confesses and is saved. What is justified? What is justified?
I think I heard somebody say just as if it had not happened.
Anybody else? Justified. I want to get them all in here. I want you all to have a chance.
She took my answer.
Uh-oh.
I believe that was Porter who actually
That's who
gave
I
us
heard.
words of wisdom.
That's who I heard say it.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Okay. So let me give you a couple definitions for justified so we can get through them. The first definition that we have is having done for or marked by a good or legitimate reason. The doctor was justified in treating her. There's this justification, there's a reason. We like to use these words with it. Valid, sound, well-founded, warranted, reasonable, logic. That's one definition. And that is justified for an act, okay? It means that we've done something and we're trying to find out if we were not where we right, but where we did we have reason for. In fact, in the law, we know that murder is wrong, but you can be justified in killing someone, right? Because the circumstances are such that you are justified for doing it, even though we know that killing is wrong, okay? 2, declared or made righteous in the sight of God. This one is a little bit more complicated because who determines that you were made right? That it says declared or made righteous in the sight of God. The only person who can determine that is God. So if you turn to man to tell you if you're righteous, you're already wrong. They can't answer whether you are righteous or not. That's a God decision. And the only way to get that answer is for you to have a relationship with God. And then 3, having been adjusted so that the print fills a space evenly on forms, a straight line, or at one or both margins. The text is justified left, lined up. When I was in journalism school, we used to line our text so that they would line up on both the left and the right, which would make some weird gaps that we would have to go back and fix and wordsmith so that it would not leave those gaps. But it just means lined up so that it looks uniform. If it's justified left, it's uniform left. If it's justified right, it's uniform right. If it's justified on both, the whole column it looks even, right? The reason I gave you all 3 of these definitions is because unfortunately we use all 3 of them when we see things like this. For with the heart one believes and is justified, right? And we sometimes don't forget to do number 2 because we're looking for man to answer 1 and 3 for us. But the real answer is your justification can only be declared by God. Man doesn't know your justification. He's not in charge of it. And so therefore, relationship with God is that much more important. It's that much more important. sometimes, and this is what the writer is this is what I believe the writer is getting at, and that is this. Sometimes we will run a race. You'll see a marathon runner run a race, and they will cross the finish line. And those of us who are not racers, we will celebrate and cheer. But the runner may look defeated. Now, you and I are thinking, this joker just ran 24 miles. How, or 26 miles, or whatever it is. How is it that you're upset? You finished. I could never do that. What we forget, though, is that that runner had a time in mind. He had a goal, or she had a goal, to run that race in 2 hours and 25 minutes. And instead, they ran that race in 2 hours and 45 minutes. They were over the goal, but they ran the race. And what the writer is saying is that the Jews are running a race and they're celebrating at the end, but they missed the goal. And we don't want Jews or Gentiles to live without understanding the goal of the race. The goal of the race is not the law. And so the law is important, but it's not the goal. Questions, thoughts, anybody? Nobody is unmuted today. You guys are quiet today. Nothing? All right. Well, if there is nothing, we will pray out and we will get ready for the next set. I'm not sure who's here. So Christy, will you pray us out, please?